Coaching in Session,
your exclusive destination for unparalleled personal and professional growth.
With your host, Michael Rearden.
Whether you choose to live within limits or break free, your mindset journey begins here.
When was the last time you looked at your life for not only the things that you could do, but the things that you believe you can't do? Sometimes we will do things unconsciously. We do it without our consent, where we say, oh, we can't do that. Or maybe we might say, that's too challenging for me at the time. Maybe the example is, I say, let's go to the gym. And maybe we're doing a bench press or something. And I say, okay, well, we're going to lift this amount of weight. And you look at me like I'm crazy, like I got two heads or something, that maybe I just stole your lunch money or your kid's lunch money. You're like, wait, what's going on here? And the reality is there's a limit, maybe from your body or maybe from your mind. Now, your body might have done it once before. Maybe it is, has become acclimated to doing the weight that we would start off with. Or maybe it's something that it has to build and it has to learn to adjust to. Very similar to cardio, same thing. If you try to run a mile today, you might have a heart attack. So let me know before you do so I can call 911 and make sure that they're on the premises. But maybe you run a mile every single day. And that mile for you is a piece of cake, your favorite cake too. It could be vanilla, it could be chocolate, carrot. You get to say, you know what? This mile is not challenging for me. Well, two things can happen there. The growth aspect to it is if it's no longer challenging for you, that means you have acclimated to it. You have ascended to it. If that mile is still challenging for you, right? You have to grow into it. Sometimes people, they'll get used to running a mile and they'll say, I ran a mile. And they might say, I feel good. I still feel good. I can run another mile. Do you? Sometimes people, they just kind of stop where the routine was. They stop where they have always stopped. I know there was a story of a generation of women where they would cut off the end of a pork roast or something, of a roast. The great-grandmother did it, the grandmother did it, the mother did it. And then one day the daughter asked, Mom, why do we cut off the end of the pork roast? And she goes, I don't know. My mom always did it. So it's what I thought I had to do. And she thought it was a great question. And then she was like, well, maybe I should figure out what I have to do. Right. So both of them went together. They asked grandma, it's like, hey, we cut off the end of the pork roast. Do we do that? And, the grandmother said, it's because my mother did this same thing. And so they all just assume, I guess we have to cut off the end of the pork roast to cook it. Well, no, they said, well, let's figure it out. So they go all the way down to the great grandma. They basically ask the same question. Can you tell us why do you cut off the end of the pork roast? And the grandmother said, I cut off the end of the pork roast because it didn't fit into the oven. The ovens they had back then were very small, or not very small, but they were smaller than what we have today. We have these huge ovens. I mean, you can fit 4 or 5 pot roasts in there, no problem. But when the oven was smaller, they had to do things to the pork roast or the cut to make it fit. But times change, we grow. We have to look at, is everything changing? Because sometimes we remain static, and we can't remain static. We have to give ourselves and we have to elevate ourselves when the world is constantly changing. Because maybe at one point you couldn't communicate with people across the sea because you didn't have a cell phone or some type of device or some type of program where you can listen to it. Like we are a top 50 podcast in Japan. And so I would have never thought that would be possible if we didn't have the flexibility and the ability to reach so many people. We start somewhere, we grow, and we don't stop growing. We keep on growing. And so I created this blog right here. It's a very good one. The Growth Factor, Elevating Beyond Your Current Limit. In this article, we talk about mindset. We talk about discipline. We talk about the pursuit of greatness and how we can't allow comfort, this ideology of our past, to define what our future can hold. And so we must do a couple of things. We must audit our life. We must develop strategies for growth. We must surround ourselves with growth-minded individuals. We must invest in learning, whether it be coaching or books or whatever. And we must be able to take calculated risks. Now, that's the inception, right? And all of these have examples on the blog. So you just can click the link right down below. You can get all the examples. You can work it through step by step. But this is all something that we have been talking about on the podcast for the past 600 plus episodes, because it's so important that we do that daily check-in where we figure out what is not working in our life. I like to call it just journaling, right? There's different phrases, there are different words. It doesn't mean that if I use one word, you can't use a different word. If you're going in one process and you feel that this process is better, you can acclimate, you can adjust. You don't have to do everything exactly how I say. Maybe you say you don't want to surround yourself with growth-minded individuals because maybe you can do it yourself. And I say that with a grain of salt, because you do so much better when you surround yourself with people. Think of the man who is a family man finally. He has a daughter or a son, and he's seeing them, and they're coming to him after he is a long day of work, very stressful. And they're like, "Daddy, daddy, daddy, hi, I love you. I'm so proud of you," or whatever. And you have to ask yourself, can you stop? No, right? Regardless of how tired you are, or fatigued, or stressed you are, you figure out a way for them. No, this is not to say that it just stops with men. It can be the same thing with women, right? It can be the same thing with anyone in the world, where if you had people who had this intention of, you are doing great and you can do better, right? That's something to be proud of. That's something to say, you know what? I have the potential to grow. And I'm sure like a tree is not going to, be upset, if it only grew an inch this year, like I only grew an inch, I need to be upset, right? Because there's all these other trees around me and they're so magnificent. Look at the redwoods. Look how tall they are. It's easy to compare. It's easy to say that your life is just one tree in the forest. But maybe that one tree builds a cabin, builds a boat, it builds a pencil to write. It does something, right? And so you have that same opportunity, that same potential to say, what will I do with my life? Will I just exist and just be amongst all these people and not be pronounced? Or will I make a loud noise? They say that if a tree was in the forest and it fell over and there was no one to listen to it, would it still make a noise? This is just an idea, a mindset, a philosophical, like a philosophy question to ask yourself. Will it? Because if it does, could you prove it? Well, in life, we can figure out what we can do and what we can prove and what we can do. But when it comes to what we can do, it's often limited by what we believe. Yeah. If you believe you can do it, then you can do it. Napoleon Hill says, if you can believe it, you can achieve it. It's not by accident either. So we have to do something. I know we have a motivational video series here in the podcast or on Reven Concepts, and the episodes are very motivational. I hope sometimes maybe we'll give a kick in the butt, and it might not be motivational, but maybe the motivational kick in the butt is good sometimes. Maybe it can be inspirational. It could be something, right? It could be the catalyst. It could be a reminder, right? I like to say the nuggets of gold. There was a gentleman. His name was, I want to say Rex. And I know 2 Rexes now in the world. He was a guy from Africa, dark skin, like real dark skin, like oil. And the sweetest guy in the world. Like literally, like I'm trying to think of sweeter guys. And I mean, he was probably the sweetest, right? And he had a family. He had a son, I believe. And he was with, like a Hispanic girl. But he was the nicest guy, right? I'm sure he's a great father. He was the nicest guy. I'm sure he was a great father. I think of when he was starting to learn how to play guitar. And I had already been playing guitar. And I was going to school for guitar, jazz guitar. And so I knew a couple of things. I knew just, a little bit more than him maybe, right? And he was just starting off. I worked at a nursing home where if you got really good, you can do the work very quickly. And we would do the work very quick. one of the things that I would do was I would bring my guitar to work because there was nothing else to do for 45 minutes after I did everything. So what would I do? I was like, I'm gonna play guitar. I'm gonna do something, right? Or I play music for the secretary or the nurses or the residents, and I would just go around and I would just go be a minstrel, right? Like a wandering, bard or whatever. One of the things that he would do was whenever I was available, he would ask me questions, right? About chords, about, like positioning for your hands, for, things that he should be practicing on. Because I was paying for school for music and he wasn't, right? Like he was just CNA at the time. But he was going to school, I forget for what, I believe some type of business or maybe engineering. He was really into guitar. He was passionate about it. So he was like, well, I'm not on this path to, be able to go to school for music, but maybe I can learn from you. And so what he would get from our conversations was he would say, every time I'm speaking to you, I'm getting a little nugget of gold, a little flake, right? And he knows that eventually he's going to be able to have a bar of gold. And so he'll ask me the questions and things like that. This is big before Google. And I mean, Google was around and everything, but it was big for ChatGPT and everything. Like all these things didn't exist. People weren't acclimated to say, hey, I am going to go on the internet and find the solutions for my problems. People were still people at that time. And so I would help him. I would, give him what he needed to know. I would help him with songs if he was having a hard time with a song. And he appreciated that. He would say, it's these moments that, I can take something from someone and I can use it, right? I can create something. And so when you are, looking at, the people around you, it's not so much that you're taking, you're never giving, is that you can learn something from someone and you never know what they're going to get in return, right? The person that's giving. For me, it was practice teaching because I was a teacher, right? I had to practice doing my skill. In school, when you go to college, you learn all the technicals, you learn all the methodologies, you learn about maybe curriculum, maybe a little bit of classroom management for like 10 minutes, and that's it, right? So you basically learn the knowledge, but applying the practical aspects of teaching and being an effective teacher is something that you have to have a hands-on experience with. Very similar to riding a bike. You can read all these books about riding a bike, but the moment you get on the bike, you need to figure out, okay, balance, handlebars, brakes. All right, let me figure this out. And you figure it out. You might fall a couple of times, but you are, even though you have the knowledge of riding the bike, you need the world experience. And so we have to give ourselves that world experience for true growth. Some people, they call it failure. You can learn from someone. You can learn from people's failures, right? You can read a book of everyone's failures, right? You can look at Benjamin Franklin or something, right? Look at all his failures. You could say, like Colonel Sanders, look at all his failures. And you can say, I learned from Colonel Sanders. I learned from Benjamin Franklin. Maybe I won't make any more mistakes because I learned from so many mistakes. Even though that's knowledge, we have to make our own mistakes. We have to figure out what is for us. And so there's a couple of things that we have to do during this article. We have to, number one, build habits. We have to develop mental toughness, and we have to stay adaptable. Now, all of these are important because the first part is the habit aspect. Because if you can get in the habit of continually growing, you're going to continually grow. If you can get into the habit of continually changing and not remaining stagnant, you're going to always change. I'm not sure if anyone knows this, but I'm going to say it. If you are listening to the podcast, episode 1 versus episode 600 or 700, wherever I am, is very different than, than the former, than the latter, right? Episode 1, I'm telling you, the audio had issues. The structure for it was different. It was live and, great. It's the beginning. Well, I don't recommend people going all the way to episode 1 and starting the podcast unless you want to see our journey. Because if you listen to episode 1 and you make yourself to episode 600 or whatever, wherever we are. And you were like, whoa, everything has changed and evolved, and still everything is the same. Sometimes we get deeper. Sometimes we might learn a different way to teach or explain a mindset or a habit, or, maybe different methods for creating disciplines or new ways to lose weight. I mean, there's things that in our life we're going to, have to say, all right, this is new. Let me learn it. I think of how a person used to have cassette players, and we would have a recorder, like a cassette recorder, and we would listen to the radio, and we would, as soon as a song came on, we would hit play or like record, and then we would record it, and then we would have the song for whenever we wanted to listen to. Now you had to be careful, because on those cassette recorders, you can also overwrite what you recorded. So if you had your favorite song, then you're like, listen to your favorite song. Yeah, this is nice. But then if you ever like record it over it, then you don't have it anymore. Well, we went over to CDs, burning CDs, and CDs were great because you couldn't overwrite your things. And if you did, it will mess up the CD. So you had to use a blank CD every single time. It was easy to record. The CDs were cheap. And I remember like the CDs were a couple of cents, and people would, from my high school, they would give me a list of like 16 to 18 songs or whatever. And I would, get the songs for them, burn them a CD, and they'll give me like $5 or $10, whatever it was. And it wasn't a business by any means, but it was something that I didn't mind doing for people. We fast forward, to today. Everything's in the cloud. Everything is available at your phone or your fingertips. And so you have access to so much more. So the habits that you have or had, you have to figure out, were those habits or all those habits still relevant? Maybe you had a habit that was successful when you were in high school. Maybe that habit was, you're going to wake up, you're going to eat 3 donuts, you're going to go to the gym, and you're going to go to work or something, and then you're going to come home, party, and then you're going to go to sleep. If you did that when your 40s or your 50s, I don't think you'll be able to, make it past the gym, because those 3 donuts are going to just get you down, going to work. You might not make it all the way through. And by the time you get home, you probably don't want to drink. You probably want to go to sleep, unless you're addicted, right? So you have to figure out what habits are not only consistent, but positive. So we figure out, all right, I've been doing this my whole life. And if you have been doing something your whole life, maybe you haven't been getting the growth that you would like, you pivot. You figure out what needs to change. We think of companies like Kodak, for example. A lot of examples today, because there's so much examples that you need for growth to happen. Kodak was like, we're not going to step into the digital world, right? We're just going to remain our old school film. And then Canon came by and they said, hey, we are stepping into the digital world, right? This is where the world is going. And so, Kodak was left behind, and Canon basically took over the camera industry. That wouldn't have happened if Kodak says, okay, everyone, we have to switch. The world is switching. Even though we have these consistent habits of doing what we do, we need to figure out what is next. The mental toughness aspect can be looked at in the sense of, there's going to be many obstacles for our growth. The gym does not feel good all the time. You might have to go on the treadmill and you're huffing and puffing. Your heart is racing. You feel like you're nauseous and you're not going to make it, right? Your head is dizzy. Your muscles feel like they're soggy noodles or whatever. And you're like, wow, like, this is rough. That could be life. That doesn't have to just be the gym. It could be financial burdens. It could be relationship struggles. It could be whatever, where you have to develop that mental toughness that no matter what goes on, you're able to fix it. You're able to adjust. I like to think of marriage, for me at least, until death do you part, not until you don't feel like doing your part. Now, I understand there are people who are in toxic relationships, but that's because you didn't do the work in the beginning. You didn't do the values. You didn't look at the character. You didn't look at the growth of what they have been doing and what they said they were doing. And if they were doing it, great. But, people can change. It's very possible, but it's more challenging for character to just kind of change and values to change overnight. So you find something in someone that's going to be permanent. And you say, this is why I want to be with you. This is why I love you. This is why I want to start a family with you. It's not because you're the prettiest. It's not because you're the most successful and you have all this money, right? You are this person. You have this lovely hair or all of these muscles. And before you know it, all of those things could be gone. You have to figure out, why do you still love this person? Why do you still want to grow together? So you have to figure that out. So there's a mental toughness aspect that you have to be able to overcome the things that will change and the things that have a hard time changing. The last bit is staying adaptable. As I said, with Kodak and with anything, things are going to change, things are going to fluctuate. And we have to be able to move through those fluctuations. We have to be able to understand if we're growing this year or if we're not growing this year. Are we living within our limits? Are we excelling past our limits? And we're breaking through barriers that maybe we thought that weren't possible at one point. All of these things are a mindset. All of these things are something that we have the potential to look at and to step into. We can step out of our limits and we can step into growth. In this article here, where I'm talking about the growth factor, elevating beyond your current limits, I encourage everyone to check out this read because it goes into so much more depth of the examples and the idea of what you need to do step by step. Of course, in the podcast episodes, I like to just kind of give an introduction for the article. Sometimes I break it down all the way. This is an article, this is a blog where I'm not going to read it verbatim or basically give you every single step because it is so important for you to work through the process yourself. I can't say, all right, everyone, listen to this. And once you're done listening to this, your life is going to change. Now, of course, if you get coaching, I do all the work for you, right? And basically you're secretary. And I'm like, okay, we got to do this next. We got to do this next. All right. Are you doing this? No. Okay. Well, we have to go back and do this, right? Did you email that person? All right. An email. And that person's like, did you do that task? If you didn't, right? We do it together. This is not for me to say, hey, I'm going to live your whole life for you. No, that, it's not that. I'm not going to make decisions for you. You're going to tell me what you want, what you need, and what you desire. And we're going to figure out, okay, how do we do it? How do we get there? And we grow gradually. It's a step-by-step process. I know many people, they look at the end goal, the destination, and they're so excited for it. They're like, oh, I can't wait for my destination to, finally be here. Maybe you're waiting for the weekend. Maybe you're waiting for that vacation and it finally comes and it finally leaves. Maybe the anticipation was, kind of, overhyped. But in life, there's no overhyping life, like how powerful life can be, how magical life can be, how joyous and how happy life can be. And there's so many people who are not living in the full capacity of what life is. And the full capacity is that it is an endless growth until the growth stops. And when the growth stops, that means you're dead. So we have the ability right now, if you're listening to this episode, I don't think the angels and the demons in hell are able to listen to the podcast. Maybe they are, I don't know. But if you are listening to this, you can apply some action in your life today. You can get a piece of paper and you can say, where can I grow? What areas of my life can use some improvement? Maybe you can even say what areas of my life are doing really well right now. Maybe you want to add a caveat, but could do better. People in the world are going to tell you what you can't be or what you can't do. I'm here to say, F it. You do what you want to do. You live the life that is going to give you the most meaning. And I'm not saying that you just sit on the sofa and drink Dr. Pepper all day. I'm not saying that you order Domino's and you stay inside and you don't go and explore the world. I'm not saying you have to travel, but I'm saying that you're not living in the confines of your comfort in your body. You're excelling. You're not afraid to grow above all the other trees in the forest so you can reach the peak and you can feel the sun, the warmth embrace of what life is. I'm sure you have known what it feels like to be warm, and I'm sure you know what it feels like to be cold. And on a winter day when the sun is hitting just right and you can feel that sun, it feels good. That is what life can be. That is what life can be for you. But you have to break through the limits. You have to break through this idea that growth is going to stop at a certain point, or that your growth is not possible. You decide what is possible. You can decide to live the life that is going to be the life of your dreams, or the life that will never come to fruition of something that it could have been. Start figuring out your growth, figure out the factor that's going to elevate you, and then give yourself the mindset that the only limit you have is the limits you believe. So if you don't believe in limits, you are limitless.